Hello there, information architecture students. This is your professor, Keith Schengili-Roberts, and here we are at week number 10. This is, in fact, the part one of a two-parter lecture that, and this is sadly the very final full lecture that I'll be giving for this course. And what I'll be doing is looking at the cognitive aspects of information architecture and also looking at icons and expression in design. So, having a look at some of the cognitive aspects of things. So, to start off with the idea, so to speak, of attention. And what is attention? Well, it's essentially your mind is basically going and selecting things to concentrate on at a certain point in time from all the massive stimuli that's around us. And what does this do? This allows us to focus on information that's relevant to what we're doing, and this involves audio and or the visual senses. This is also focused, and focus and divided attention enables us to be selective in terms of the massive competing stimuli, but it limits our ability to keep track of all events. So information at the interface ought to be constructed to capture users' attention. In other words, use perceptual boundaries like essentially windows, might be the use of color, reverse video, sound, and perhaps hopefully not flashing lights, but essentially things that would essentially grab people's attention. And this can be fairly subtle. And it can also be overpowering depending on how things are designed. With any luck within your target websites, what you will have seen, if the site has some fairly well-designed visual aspects of things, you will see that your eyes are naturally drawn to certain parts of a page. So that might be, for example, an image. It could be, or an image of a person might be more compelling than, say, an image of something that doesn't have a face, for example, like a rock. And by the same token, you also have things like larger text, such as things like headers, tend to stand out more than, say, the body text within the content of the web page. And it's important to realize that there are various ways in which you can actually organize the information to essentially help people understand better how the information is to be essentially digested and sorted by those who are attempting to work with the information that you're giving them. As an example of this, well, how about going through this list and trying to find the price of a double room at the Holiday Inn in Bradley? So, again, what are we looking for? Okay, double room and Holiday Inn in the town of Bradley. Okay. So let's see. Okay, Pennsylvania, Bedford. Okay, Bedford. No, Bedford. Okay, so okay, Bedford. Bradley. Okay, Bradley. Okay, that's one thing we've hit. Bradley. Single, double. Okay. But it's not the Holiday. Not the Holiday Inn. Okay, Bradley. Okay, check. Double room. Check. Oh, Holiday House. Okay. Oh, here we are. This might be it. Holiday Inn. Double bed, $40. Okay. And to make sure there's nothing else. Yeah. Okay. So you can see that while this is a perfectly adequate way of sorting and displaying information, it does really leave something to be desired. So and again, one of your jobs as information architects is to try to put this in a way so that it becomes easier for the reader to better digest the information at a glance. So here is the same information, and now, this, how easy is this then to find the price for a double room at the Holiday Inn in Columbia? So, okay, we got city, hey, okay, Columbia, fair enough. And then Holiday Inn, okay, Columbia, Holiday Inn, cool, that's probably it right there. And then rate single, and there we go, it's right there. So that was, as you can tell, that was a lot faster than the organization, or lack thereof, from the previous frame. So again, this is the sort of thing that you need to keep in mind when organizing information, albeit on a website or in documentation. It still applies. You want to try to make it easy for the reader to find the information they're looking for as fast as possible. Now, there are some design implications for this. So in other words, you want to make, information salient when it needs attending to. So you don't want to have everything sort of popping out at once. You want to sort of, if possible, put things in kind of a progression. So that, if there are stages, you want to have a person look at this thing first and then that thing first, that thing second, then, that you can design things deliberately to do things like that. So you might have, like, for example, a large button for the first thing, in, say, the upper left and quadrant. And then you might follow that with say, like, a large header text or something like that for, say, the second thing. So, as I say, use techniques that make things stand out, such as color, order, spacing, underlining, sequencing, or animation. And the button I was saying is essentially that's a way of essentially making it pop out of the screen a bit more. You also want to avoid cluttering the interface with too much information. Search engines and form fill-ins that have simple and clean interfaces have been shown to be easier to use, and with you only have to look at the relative success of something like this, of the standard Google interface, which is about as basic and streamlined as you can get while still being effective. And even these days, you go to the page. I mean, the fact that there is a text field there is almost you almost don't even need that these days, because if you're like me, if I'm say on my tablet or if I'm on my phone, I try to type in, if I try to type into the field, it'll automatically put the search into the URL field. So it's really trying to keep things as simple and uncluttered as possible. One thing I'd recommend is that if you wanted to take a look at some older web designs for search engines, go and take a look at something like, say, the old Yahoo interface. Go to the Wayback Machine and take a look at the evolution of the design, and you'll see that search engines have become decidedly less cluttered as time has gone on, and people essentially the design is essentially drawing you in to do nothing other than searching for the text-based content or spoken word content, depending on the interface you're using, and then doing that as finding the information you need as quickly as possible. Compare this to something like, well, how about this? Yeah. Oof, wow. Yeah, so again, there's where do you start with something like this? I mean, that's this is a functioning website. This is, and thankfully it's in right in the middle, near the top middle, Black Hills Youth Football League. All right, so it's a football league, and presumably you want to be able to find information about the where do you go to find that okay, top left, family-oriented youth tackle football, and okay, good, all right, okay, that's good. We proudly support our okay, that good. It's hard to anything to do with football? Well, not really, but okay. Youth sports program of the year. Yeah, hey, okay, good stuff. 2012 coaching rules. Saturday, July. Okay, there's a meeting for coach rules. Now over half over 20. Okay. Family-owned, and you see, where's the navigation? It's now, of course, this is from a little while ago, as you can probably tell from the years on it, but again, where is your eye drawn to? It's drawn all over the place. I mean, this is a great counterexample showing you essentially how not to do good design, because it actively interferes with trying to find the content that somebody coming to the football league page might actually be looking for. Okay, so they do have a sign up form, but what if I'm trying to find out where the next actual game is? And if you look in the lower right, where you see this very weird sort of droplet shaped or splash shaped navigation with home, news, and special events, and if there is an actual schedule, it's already scrolled past the cutoff line for the middle of the page, so it's definitely not working terribly well. And this is one example. I mean, there are other examples out there. Hey, here's another one now, and it's worth pointing out that this doesn't exist anymore, at least not in this, and certainly not in this format. So this is havenworks.com, and this is from several years ago, and oh boy, where would you start to have a look at, to go and find information you're looking for on this particular site. It really is almost a definition of, all over the place in terms of design. So one of the things that you really have to think about, and again, think about this in terms of the target website you're currently working with, is can you effectively, declutter things? In other words, now don't remove everything. It shouldn't just be text and, a single image, but you want to make sure that it's arranged in such a way so that people essentially are aided by the way things are designed. And a nice example of that I ran across recently. This is from a presentation by Paul Ackers, who's an author on lean processes, where he talked about fixing what bugs you. And by the way, lean is a management technique that focuses on reducing waste. So one of those forms of waste is over-processing, and another is reducing waiting times. So making the boarding pass more intelligible to flyers ought to reduce mix-up by passengers. So you have a standard boarding pass at the top, and I've used many boarding passes exactly like this, certainly in the past, and I'm looking at it, and I see the information about the flight, the date, and the origin, and thankfully, I'm actually really quite thankful that it has the seat number printed out quite clearly. It's zone 2 and it's seat 19B. Okay, that and you see it's using a box to sort of organize that information in a convenient manner. But there's a whole bunch of other things there that it's like it's all scattered all over the place. It gets kind of hard. And then so what he's come up with is a lean version of the same type of boarding pass with essentially the same information. And while this particular boarding pass is, it has been pointed out that there are still potentially some problems with this, but this is, in so many ways, so much more clear as to, what is actually going on. You can actually see, where the flight is originating, where it's going to. Gate information is definitely highlighted. The actual boarding time with an icon there, displaying somebody who's about with their bag, and then the actual location of the seat. Hey, that's pretty nice. That's not so hard to do. In fact, the one thing I think that has in fact been pointed out, this might be a little bit tricky to do, is that quite often there's a tearaway portion. So there's I believe that's the reason for the need for a couple of the bars there for the barcodes. So one is actually one is not on the tearaway portion, but there would still need to be something there that would be available, and I gather that there is a reason for having the two types of barcodes. But having said that, that's far from being insurmountable, and I can tell you that it's as someone who has gone on a bunch of flights for business reasons, I would so love to have a lean boarding pass, much as you see on the bottom, especially when it comes to trying to figure out where the actual seat is. Having it marked on the card would actually be quite helpful. It makes it apparent that exactly how many rows you're in, and whether it's a window seat or an aisle seat. I've certainly accidentally been in, say, the wrong seat on one or two occasions, because sometimes I find it hard to understand if the A letter is the window, or the B letter is the windows. It's like, how are you supposed to read that? So, anyways, that's me, but you get the sense that there is room for improvement here, and you see what's going on here. That they're essentially what he's come up with is coming up with some visual ways, and this is despite the fact that there's a lot more icons and so forth on this particular token. They're useful. They provide information with the things that they're associated with. So again, think about this in terms of your web page. How can you use information such as images, such as icons, to perhaps draw the user's attention and in such a way that they will better understand how to go, and this is, this is particularly good for things like, say, tasks and flows, to move from, say, one step to the next step to the step after that. Now we need to look at the idea of perception and how information is acquired from the world and then transformed into experiences. And the obvious implication here is that to design representations that are readily perceivable. In other words, text ought to be legible, and icons should be easy to distinguish and read. Now, one sort of example that we have already seen is something similar to this, to inattentional blindness, is what we saw with the banner blindness test we did in an earlier lecture. And I'm not going to play this particular YouTube video. You're probably already fairly familiar with it. And basically, this sort of emphasizes the fact that people often fail to see what ought to have been plainly visible because people's attention is not focused on it. Now, if you have, I don't want to spoil this, but if you haven't actually seen it, it is worth a look, especially if you've never seen it before. But it's worth pointing out that while a lot of people have heard of the original experiment and perhaps noticed the gorilla, but they may in fact miss out on the fact that the curtains change color and that one of the players actually leaves. So if you're actually being asked to count the balls and how many times they're being dribbled, whether or not you actually see the gorilla or not, I'm sorry, I have in fact fully spoiled this at this point, but there are other things going on, and people really do pay attention to what they're being asked to focus on. So most of our perceptual processing occurs outside of our conscious awareness, and our attentional resources are finite. You need to, again, keep that in mind when you are designing how to lay out content on a web page. And again, like this, that it may seem like most web pages are fairly straightforward, and you're not going to make something that's going to be hopefully a hodgepodge of colors and distracting people as to where they're going to look on a page. But I often find that there's a tipping point where you may have, for example, ad banners and so forth, that you may have some control over on the page, and you may find that there comes a tipping point where you begin to lose people's focus as to where they ought to be looking at what they should be looking at on a page. Here's an idea of in terms of perception. So which of these is the easiest or hardest to read? And or say the hardest on the eyes is another way of looking at this. And generally speaking, things that do not have a lot of contrast, such as one on the bottom right, where you have kind of a dark pink and then you have the red text. Yeah, that's going to be particularly hard to read. But then you also look at some of these other patterns, and like let's face it, having the red text on a dark green background is also it's relatively easy to read, but it's hard on the eyes. You have the sort of After Effect image coming up by when you look at it too long. So generally speaking, most people would say that the black on white text is in fact the best way to go, and certainly it does offer the best contrast. So again, that is something you might want to think about. It is easy to get into the idea that, well, maybe we can just have just maybe a grayer text to sort of lay things out instead of a full black. Maybe that might look better for aesthetic reasons. And again, there are some real reasons for wanting to do something like that. But then again, you can also run into some real problems. So, this is a case here. Negative examples of low contrast in terms of user experience. So you have the text on the left, and it's genuinely quite a bit harder to read, and it's not just the and you see what's going on here, at least with, say, something like the navigation portion, is that the gray is essentially sort of showing what's been grayed out. But having said that, it then makes it a lot harder to read and then potentially select. So a quote from the article from the Nielsen-Norman group that this is from, it's obvious that Squarespace.com wants users to click the high contrast button in the corner to get started. So that's why it's there. But do they also want customers to read about the features or interact with the navigation? The gray text on the light gray background suggests indifference. The top navigation and body contrast are so poor that few users will stick around to read it. And then on the right-hand side, again, another quote from the Nielsen-Norman Group article. Quartz.com article pages begin with the left navigation at high contrast, which is what you see on the left-hand side here, the sort of the middle page. But when the user hovers over an article from the list, the sill dims to a contrast level almost beyond recognition in the right. So you can see, for example, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but basically I'm putting my cursor. In fact, the black cursor in the original piece, you can see that is now very much harder to read. So the sill dims to a contrast level almost beyond recognition, and the text the user is most interested in becomes then tremendously hard to read. It might also be worth pointing. Well, it is definitely worth pointing out some perceptual illusions that may that also come into play. So here is a set of illusions, and these illusions focus on the way that we perceive faces and body shapes. In the first one is essentially, is it a cup or is it two faces? How many legs does the elephant in fact have? Is the picture in the lower left, is it a young lady or an old lady? And then the one in the middle is that a rabbit or is it a duck? And again, it sort of depends on your own particular perceptions. Now, you may be looking at the upside down face of Adele and wondering what's going on there. And well, this has actually been photoshopped and is used what's popularly been called the Thatcher illusion. And I'll explain what's going on. How would I click on this? And yeah, that's the illusion going on there. So essentially, the eyes were upside down, as were the lips, and to most people they seem more or less the right way around. Looking at things when you see the face as it was before. Let's see if I can switch back to that. So there we are. There's the original, and the eyes in fact are set as if they were facing right side up as opposed to being upside down. The same goes for the lips, and it's just the way that we tend to perceive faces and what our expectations are, even when they are in fact not there. So again, how when it comes to things like, say, web design, again, you need to be cognizant of the fact that people will in fact perceive eyes, for example, or will perceive images that where in fact that may not be what you're actually trying to get across. So here's some other, relatively common, well-known illusions, primarily focused on how we perceive straight lines against different backgrounds. And in all cases, what you see here, the primary lines are in fact parallel. And these two illustrations neatly illustrate that, human visual processing is really not a straightforward affair. The grid illusion on the left contains ghost-like blobs at the interstices, which has long been thought to be due to the way our brain constructs edges, pooling information in a way so that a point at an intersection is surrounded by more intensity than a point at the middle of a line, and the intersection appears darker due to the increased inhibition. So, the spots that you see, they're not actually there in the image. And then what you see on the right, this is called Nino's extinction, which in fact contains 12 black dots. It's thought that the dots are removed from your peripheral vision as your brain reconstructs the background. So the dots only appear in the center of where you focus. So if you then, look around the image, the dots will suddenly seem to pop out. And certainly in my case, I find it hard to see more than 2 at a time. But if you look around, and this is not an animation, if you look around, you will be able to spot, in my case, I can typically only see 2. but they are in fact, all 12 are in fact there in the original image. It's just that your brain essentially blots out the other ones because they're not the focus of attention. And in this case, middle lines are the same size, but the illusion of perspective makes them appear to be of different lengths. And if you've ever gone to the Ontario Science Center, you've probably seen a whole bunch of things that have illusions exactly like this and some of the other examples. So again, how is this actually being applied to web design? And again, it's really more along the lines of realizing the fact that it can in fact be easy to fool the brain and to draw attention away to other things. Here's another example, and again, this actually comes back more to the idea of how we comprehend how we comprehend and read content. So what you're seeing here, again, what it's saying is that, look at the chart and then say the color, not the word. So I'm going to say the color, not the word, in order, and I'm probably going to do horrendously bad. but hey, so I'm going to. So again, the point is, say the color, not the word. So here we go: green, red, blue, yellow, blue, black, red, blue, green, black. Oh man, okay. And if I was just saying the words yellow, blue, orange, black, red, green, purple, yellow, red. Yeah, I mean you get the difference. So the version on the right, basically demonstrates that naming the font color of a printed word is an easier and quicker task if the word meaning and the font color are not incongruent. And what does this do? And here's a quote from Wikipedia. This test is considered to measure selective attention, cognitive flexibility, and processing speed. Oh, okay, well, apparently I didn't do great with that. And it's used as a tool in the evaluation of executive functions. An increased interference effect is found in disorders such as brain damage, dementias, and other neurological diseases, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or a variety of mental disorders such as schizophrenia, addictions, and depression. Okay, so this can be used as a diagnostic tool. Now I want to move on to the idea of looking at perception from the Gestalt perspective, and I'm going to look at 6 different areas and then apply these to individual web pages. So here we have the idea of proximity, where most people will see 4 columns of circles. And then we have similarity, where most people will see 2 alternating rows of circles. And then the idea of continuity, where we have 2 cross lines of 4. Okay, so what is this? Is it 2 cross lines, or is it 4 separate lines? And most people would say, hey, it's going to be 2 cross lines. Because the idea is that the continuity of one line sort of goes into the past the break, so to speak, of the things on the different axes. But yes, it could in fact be 4 separate lines, but most of us would see that as 2 overlapping lines. Then we have closure, where the white triangle in the center is as opposed to seeing 4 circles with pieces which are then cut out of them. And then what we have for the area, the smaller of the 2 overlapping objects, as seen as a figure, and the rest is then background. So, and the area sometimes better known as essentially figure ground. And then we have the idea of symmetry. Our mind tends to perceive objects as developing around a center point, and it's pleased when it can divide those objects evenly and then find balance. So again, when you're designing, images and coming up with UI systems, you want to try to use these things because this is how people group information into like areas. So here's an example of proximity in UX design, and which form field do you in fact think is better. And this is actually from a really nice article, again from the Nielsen Norman Group, looking at form design in white space. And most people would say that in fact the one on the right is better because it's closer together. It's more the things are more closely associated with the items that they are bound to. So you see that the sign up box it encloses the whole thing. and then you see the name, goes with the following text field. I mean, in the first example, essentially the name of the text box and then the following text that follows it, they're all equidistant. But if you then close up the space between the name and then the following text field and then date of birth and its text, and then leave a larger space between the two, it becomes that much easier to understand, which form actually belongs to which thing in the sign-up sheet to look at. I'm sure you probably have looked at forms, certainly more so with paper forms, I find, where it may be hard to tell if the title that's associated with the text space should be the one above it or the one below it. And again, if you more closely associate items with each other, it becomes that much easier for people to distinguish what's going on. And again, in this case, which of these two forms is in fact easier to read, and you see the one on the left, and again, it's fairly compact, but that's not all that's going on here. Notice that on the right-hand version, essentially has much the same information, but it's dividing things up into separate sections. So we have a personal information section, followed by an account information section, followed by a contact information section, and it may in fact take up more space, but that's not the point. It's in fact going to be easier to use for most people coming to that site. Here's an example of similarity, and in this case we're looking at similar objects, but similarity extends to things like shape, color, size, and say the arrangement of like types of things. So again, it promotes the idea that if you're looking for a type of backpack, it makes sense that you're looking at other things that would then say look like it, and then maybe not so much with the watches, but then things that might be related to backpacks, such as say a satchel, what you have on the bottom, again, and then you see a lot of things which then look satchel-like. And then then you see the same sort of thing with say information for books, and again you see book covers. It would be part of the reason why I guess that we see books in the particular form factor that they're in is that typically speaking they are a rectangle, and we read them in a particular manner that we've grown accustomed to. So it might actually be a little bit jarring here if in fact there was like a completely square book or perhaps a triangular book. But again, to try again you want to try to have people look at things in this case that that essentially look more or less the same, so that people will associate it with each other. Here's some ideas in terms of continuity. So what's going on here is that this is definitely a deliberate design decision, is that the people in these images, they're actually looking at the key content on the page. So on the left-hand side, we have the male model in some sort of jacket, and what's he doing? He's looking at the contact page for Wilson Group USA, and all and that is where your eye is drawn. You want to see what he's looking at. The same goes for the one on the right, where you see the fellow in the hat, and he's chatting to the other fellow, and notice where the hands are. It's right where it says "Watch Now." So that's pretty much where your eyes is going to be drawn to, at least in most cases. And again, notice the contrasting text that comes out. It's definitely going to stand out amidst the background, which is fairly busy in the background, to be fair. Here's some examples of closure. So and again, this is perhaps not used as much in things like say web design, but but it's most prevalent in things like icon and logo designs, such as the ones you see here. So it's worth pointing out that the IBM logo at the top, well, what are you actually seeing? It's actually a bunch of non-interlaced lines, essentially, but people can make out the letters spelling the IBM. And then, for example, the one that says Coca-Cola on the right, again, you perceive the bottle, even though it's really a fork and a knife, and then the words Coca-Cola. There is in fact no actual bottle, so to speak, that's there, but nevertheless that's what we perceive. Here's an example of area and figure ground within a user experience. So the smaller of the two overlapping objects is seen as the figure and the rest is the background. And quite often, to further emphasize this fact, the web page, which is, and you see the effect here, essentially is grayed out a bit to make it essentially have the box in front pop out more. So I mean, it is a pop-up, but it's also a sort of popping out, and it definitely grabs your attention. Now, we can debate how good or how bad pop-ups are, and to be fair, a lot of good designers these days have tamed the extent to which pop-ups were used egregiously in the past. But again, the point is that if you're trying to get somebody to look at something, it's hard for this sort of thing to be missed completely. Let's put it that way. And if used judiciously, in something like this, as in here's information on a particular sale, and of course the inevitable thing about, hey, give us your email. Well, there's other ways to get users attention, but make it perhaps more genuinely useful to the people coming to, rather than having to surrender your email address all the time. But having said all of that, this definitely pops out, and that's basically what's going on here. And now here's a fairly striking example of symmetry. So again, with the idea of symmetry is that people tend to look at objects and they will try to essentially complete in their head what's going on. And so what we have in with Flourish on the left hand side is again we have a sort of a bilateral symmetry running through the middle of this, and it is a fairly eye-pleasing design as a result. So essentially the center is where our eyes are then drawn to, and then we would then have a look at the items in that appear above that, supposedly, such as usability, aesthetics, visibility, and flexibility. And notice how Flourish is directly above the tree. Again, it's above the center space, and it's above the section that for the bilateral symmetry on the page. And again, we have another example on the right hand side for the north face, where you see the fellow essentially bisected in two by his clothing choice. But again, you see that this is one person, and this is contrasting the types of activities and types of clothing that can be worn, and again it's very striking, because you're in your mind you complete the image of the person in both types of clothing. So some design implications for all this. Icons should enable users to readily distinguish their meaning. Bordering and spacing are effective visual ways of grouping information. Sounds should be audible and distinguishable. Now, again, careful here. One of the last things you want to do is have sounds suddenly come out of your web page when people are not expecting them. But if in fact audio is a key part of your website, typically with, say, an embedded video or so forth, you want to make sure that it's not muddy sound, that it's in fact, as I say here, audible and distinguishable. Speech output ought to enable users to distinguish between the set of spoken words. So again, an assistive technology in terms of accessibility. Text should be legible and distinguishable from the background. I can remember watching subtitled films where, for example, the subtitled text would always appear in one color. I can remember watching Fellini's 10 back in my own days in university, and they had white subtitled text, and there were portions of the film that were essentially in white, and you had, at that point, unless you knew Italian, you had no idea what was going on. So, again, text ought to be legible and distinguishable from the background. And what's done these days is that often you have text that's in perhaps a bit of an outline to make it stand out more strongly. And if tactile feedback ought to allow users to recognize and distinguish different meanings. And again, that's not something that you would see necessarily in web page design, but you would see that in some sort of haptic devices that may work perhaps on your phone. So if in fact you get like a little the little sort of gyrating weight that is in a phone, when you get, if you hit the wrong thing, you may trigger it that to go off, to sort of to jog the person to say that is an incorrect entry. So that is one possibility in that area. Now let's have a little look at memory. So what you need to understand about memory is that first comes encoding and then retrieval of knowledge. However, we don't remember everything, and attentional and contextual elements factoring into what we remember and how well we remember it. So the more attention paid to something and the more processing thinking we do about something, the better we remember it, which essentially creates many neural connections. So, and we also learn by doing as well as by thinking. So again, now memory, it involves first encoding and then retrieving the knowledge, and context is important in affecting our memory. So we may remember where and when we were. When, for example, a smell is often associated with a particular memory of perhaps where you were when you first smelled perhaps lilacs in late spring, or perhaps a particular perfume or cologne that you may associate with a particular person. And we tend to recognize things much better than being able to recall things, and we remember less about objects we have photographed than when we observe them with the naked eye. And this is from an example from 2014 done by Henkel. So the information processing theory of learning. Essentially you have, as you see here, you have sensory memory, and then you have whatever's not forgotten is then transferred and may then be rehearsed, and that is what some people say dreams are about, is that it's a way for your short-term memory to remember the important things that happen during the course of the day. And then either portions of that either then get forgotten or then transferred into long-term memory, and then you have to then go through the process of retrieving that. So you can see there's a whole bunch of steps here, and for the most part, as I say, it's easier to essentially try to remember. Sorry, not remember we don't remember everything. Because that involves filtering and processing, and that takes time and neurons to do properly. So we recognize things again better than being able to recall things. So in terms of processing and memory, so encoding is the first stage of memory, and that determines which information is attended to in the environment and how it's then interpreted. And the more attention that's paid to something, the more it's processed in terms of thinking about it and comparing it with other knowledge. So the more likely it is to then be remembered. That essentially is then information which is more likely to be remembered, because when learning, for example, about information architecture, it's much better to reflect upon it, carry out exercises, have discussions with others about it, and write notes than just passively read a book, listen to a lecture such as this one, or watch a video about it. So the more essentially neurons that are fired, that's associated with the learning that you're doing, the more that the more likely you're able to retain that information going forward. Context can also be a big factor when it comes to memory. It affects the extent to which information can subsequently be retrieved. So one particular test found that essentially words that are learned underwater are better than retrieved underwater. Again, that may seem a kind of like an odd thing to say, but it kind of makes sense when you think about it. So sometimes it can be difficult for people to recall information that was encoded in a different context. You're on a train and someone comes up to you and says hello. You don't recognize them for a few moments, but then you realize it's one of your neighbors. you're only used to seeing your neighbor in the hallway of your apartment block and not seeing him out of context, which makes him difficult to recognize initially. So, we've probably all run into a very similar sort of situation like that, where you've seen somebody who's an acquaintance and they're in a different context, and it's like, I know them, but how do I know them? That's often, that may in fact be a context issue. And again, sort of coming back to some of the cognitive ways of associating information, we're looking here at two strings of text, but they are in fact the two. They're both exactly the same. The only thing that is different between the two is the coloring, and more importantly, I'd say in this case, is actually with the coloring gives you a hint as to the how these are then grouped together. So it's easier for people to remember IBM, SAT, MTV, PhD, as opposed to trying to remember all of the letters as X, IBM, SAT, MTV, PhD, X, like that. It's that. So if you provide a way of chunking the information, as you see here, it is again, it's easier for people to remember. In terms of recognition versus recall, command-based interfaces require users to recall from memory a name from a possible set of hundreds of particular names. Now, one of the great things about graphical user interfaces is that they provide visually based options that users need only browse through until they recognize the one that they need. So web browsers, MP3 players, what have you, provide lists of things like visited URLs, song titles, etc. that support recognition memory. And what you're actually seeing here is an old-fashioned text adventure. I think this is actually from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. You examine the toothbrush. It looks like every other toothbrush you've ever seen. Use toothbrush? I don't know the word you... Okay. Brush teeth with the toothbrush. Congratulations on your fine dental hygiene. Okay. What do you have in your inventory? You have... And you see, you have to remember that I means inventory. You have no tea, a towel, a loose pile of junk mail, a toothbrush, a flathead screwdriver, your own gown being worn. It looks like your gown contains pocket fluff and a thing your aunt gave you, which you don't know what it is. Yeah, text adventures are lots of fun, but you do have to remember specific commands, and I think you can actually find versions of. I don't know if this is now freely available, but it is a fun romp if you want to. Go down a text-based adventure. It will give you a real feel for text-based commands and how they then work. Now, this is I'm going to be talking about here is kind of a controversial thing. This comes up a lot in information architecture. And this is the classic 7 plus or minus 2 problem, way of thinking when it comes to how much information people can actually remember at any one time. This comes from a piece from the mid-50s from George Miller. And it basically comes down to people's intermediate memory capacity is limited and may be influenced by primary and recency effects. And many designers think that this is useful in terms of interaction design. So what it basically says is the idea that you want to have in, say, your navigation bar, like no more than 7 items plus or minus 2. Coming across that as as being a limit in terms of our capacity for processing the information that's actually visually there. Now, if I come back to something like this, well, how many numbers can you in fact memorize? And most people, if I give this test to them, may in fact typically will be able to remember when asked somewhere between 5 to possibly 9. But usually when I've done this in an actual class, if people are lucky, they may in fact only remember 5 of these. So like typically what I do is that I show this for 30 seconds, ask people not to write it down, and then ask, give me some numbers, and typically it's usually it's no less than 5, but often it's not much more than 7, and that would seem to, corroborate the basic findings from the paper. And so as I say here, what some designers then do is that they then present only, say, 7 options on a menu, or display only 7 icons on a toolbar, or have no more than 7 bullets in a list, or place only 7 items in a pull-down menu, and so on and so forth. But this is in some ways, it's in fact fundamentally wrong certainly when seen from the idea of looking at things in terms of, say, short-term memory. Why? Well, it's basically an inappropriate application of the theory. People can scan lists of bullets tabs for the one they want. So even if it's a bullet list of 10 items, which is one more than 7 plus 2, they can still look through it. It's not it's less to do with having to retrieve information because from memory, because the information is already there. They don't have to recall them from memory because they, as they say, they are in fact still in front of them. Sometimes, a small number of items is in fact good, but that depends on the task and the available screen estate. And so, more recently, Miller's contemporaries, such as Broadbent back in the mid-70s, have suggested that working memory is actually more like, in people, is more like 4 to 6 items, and others, like Lecomte back in 1999, have argued for as few as 3. In practice, a range of 3 to 6 bits appears ideal for interaction design, and that's a quote from the Glossary of Human-Computer Interaction. But I will say that, in general, you don't, while you may not, from the standpoint of, say, short-term memory, the 7 plus or minus rule may not actually come into play in terms of UI. You got to remember the idea I was talking about at the top of the lecture about clutter. You really don't want to go overboard with these types of things. So, you don't want to have, a myriad of items in, say, your navigation bar, because then people, it's not that people will not remember what the first item was when they get to the last item, because they can always come back to the first item and look at it, but it's just providing that much more choice, and can you in fact winnow things down to more of its essentials? If you have more than 9 items in a navigation bar, it may just make things harder to navigate in general because there's so many items up front. Can you in fact collapse the 9 down to a smaller, more compact group while still making it effective? So that's something that's really, I'd say that in some ways that's a better application of things, not limiting it to a specific number, but just saying that, too much is in fact too much. So you don't want to overload users' memories with complicated procedures for carrying out tasks. You want to design interfaces that promote recognition rather than recall. And you want to provide users with various ways of encoding information to help them remember things, such as categorizing content, perhaps adding color, flagging, grouping things together, perhaps even timestamping. Okay, so that's going to cover off that particular area. Now I want to move on to icons and expressions in design. And this is one of the I definitely enjoy this particular portion of the lecture, because I have to say this is really, as I say here, it's a one time you can justify buying a comic book for work related purposes. This is and I will be using some extracts from this throughout the lecture. The book called Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud is a terrific guide to iconography. And as Lou Rosenfeld, who is one of the co-authors of the Polar Bear book, said, it's more than just a book about comics. This gets to the heart of how we deal with visual languages in general. So, what is an icon? One definition from the University of Washington, which I like, it's a small graphic symbol that represents a program, file, or folder on a computer. Clicking on an icon with a mouse generally causes a program to run, the folder to open, or the file to be displayed, if in fact that's possible. And here we have a bunch of mouse icons. Yeah. So you can in fact have text-only icons, you can have picture-only icons, and you can have a combination of the two, text and picture. So now the one you see in the middle is there deliberately because it was essentially a picture-only design where it's like, well, what's really going on here? What do these particular icons actually denote. And yeah, it's not readily apparent. So whereas you see the ones at the top, that's where you say web, images, group, directory, directory news, the associations are certainly much better when you actually have text and pictures together. So we have search with the magnifying glass, favorites with the star, and media with the earth and the gigantic musical note. Yeah, it's just in a way to sort of it's easier to remember at a glance what those icons then mean again if they're at least the first time associated with some text. In terms of the world of iconic representation, icons are ultimately visual representations of actual things or actions. The best icons are those that are received rather than perceived. So what does that actually mean? Well, essentially, this is essentially information you have on the left-hand side at the bottom, where you used to have a bunch of icons, and you can, for the most part, figure out what's going on with them. So if I look at the one, like top left, that's a house, and then we have a page, and then we have a file folder or file folders, and then going on we have a printer, and then we have a picture of the earth, and so on and so forth. Whereas on the right hand side we have, if I then went to Google and typed in web icons and then go to images, and then we have transparent background, personal website, black and white web. You see, you then have to read it. It's much less immediate, and that's what you actually see in the actual cartoon strip featured above. So pictures, as he says, are received. We need no formal education to get the message. The message is instantaneous. Writing, however, is perceived information. It takes time and specialized knowledge to decode the abstract knowledge of language. So where pictures are more abstracted from reality, they require greater levels of perception, more like words. And when words are bolder, more direct, they require lower levels of perception and are received faster, more like pictures. And then you get to something like, say, the pyramid of visual iconography, where the top is the most abstracted and hard to follow and understand, where at the bottom they're the most specific, running along the spectrum from received to perceived. So in good UI design, you want to aim for something that is an immediate, is an immediate and as specific as possible. Now, having said that, trade-offs are inevitable. So here is, and again, here's an example of, now this is again a very old website. This is actually from the early days of the web. And again, this is the old, if you're familiar with Wired magazine, this was the original website that went along with it, Hotwired. Notice how the accompanying text at the bottom provides the most information through context. So if you look at just the icons, and what I would normally do in class, in front of a live audience, is that I just present the abstracted icons. And again, you have thing that says, Signal, then Eyewitness, and then Piazza, and then Renaissance 2, and Coin, and Wired, and even with the explanations underneath it, it's not clear really what's going on. So, not surprisingly, this particular design, as such, did not last long, and the icons were essentially tossed out, as were the text, and it became much more straightforward and then simplified to better show the construction of, essentially, people were lost, because where would I go to, read an article, Eyewitness or Signal, or you wouldn't know where to go for the most part. And I would say, I don't even really need to ask this question about do you think these are effective icons or labels? No, clearly the answer is no. This is still potentially a problem. So here's a set of icons to be used on an internet site. And, I'm going to give you a moment to think about this. What do you think they mean? So this is on an internet site. You're within your company, and, these are there as is. And, what in fact do they mean? So when I canvass people, the first one would be typically, Wi-Fi information. The second one might be, is typically, typical response is search, and then the briefcase in the middle might be, is more typically considered to be files. It's like, it doesn't look like a file folder, but it could be, that something is contained within it. And then what's the other thing? Well, the thing beside that is that, well, it looks like maybe it's binders. Okay. And then the final thing is, well, it kind of looks like a rocking chair. I mean, it is a rocking chair with a speech bubble. What the heck? So, and I can't comment on the how you can guess as to how effective these things were. So here's the actual text that accompanies these. IT support, personalized job board. Job board? What? Really? Oh, okay. It's the guy in his suitcase. You go to his suitcase for a job interview? I don't know. Internal audit? Okay, maybe. And departments is a rocking chair? Yeah, it's really hard to understand the context in these particular situations. And again, if you want to read more, this is really lovely article from the Nielsen Norman Group talking about bad icons. It's a fun read with additional examples along the same lines. And even if you think that this again might be considered extreme, here's another relatively contemporaneous website. Images really should not get in the way of reception. So here we are for getsmarteraboutmoney.ca, and then you click on the managing your money drop down, and then you get helpful images along with all of the items that then follow along it. So financial planning, investment basics, budgeting, saving money, managing debt, getting advice, protecting your money, so on and so forth. And you look at some of these and it's kind of hard to, why is the guy for bonds, he doesn't seem terribly happy. Does that mean you shouldn't be happy about bonds? But the woman above, it seems, very happy. So, so stocks are better than bonds. No, okay, I don't, but you can see that, the thought processes that go into, why is this image associated with the label, actively gets in the way of things. A subsequent version of this website, not surprisingly, dropped most of these images, certainly all of these images from the drop-down menu, and then reserved them for where they wanted to use them within the actual website. So, do I think they're useful and effective? Definitely not. They actually get in the way in this particular case. And you can also see that, there's a lot going on here. Perhaps there would be better ways of providing ways of dividing up the information that you see here, as opposed to just using images to do so. And there's also the importance of context. So, again, do you think that these particular icons all signify the same thing? And clearly not. On the right, on the far right, you have an actual player one button from an arcade machine, and then you have, it's a men's washroom sign, but it is essentially the same icon, and then you have this on a website. What the heck does that mean? Yeah, and I believe in the original case it was actually like connecting with people, but it's definitely not obvious. You would have to click on it to find out what's going on, and if that's the case, then perhaps maybe don't use that icon. So I don't think anybody thought clicking on this would be launching a new game or would help them find a washroom. But by the same token, does in this particular context, does it make any sense at all? And again, I'd say no. There's been some really good designs for guidelines for things like how to make effective road signs. And this is from the U.S. Department of Transportation's Human-Centered Systems Research Program. This is from some fairly extensive documentation looking at what makes an effective road sign. So these examples nicely illustrate the received versus perceived design. So again, what you have on the left-hand side, icon design issue, quick and accurate recognition. So, and again, if you're driving at highway speed, you may not have a whole lot of time to read the road work ahead sign, but you see someone digging, it's like, okay, clearly there's some sort of work ahead going on ahead. Or the twisty, turny arrow for displaying visual and spatial concepts, as opposed to just saying curves ahead. It again makes it much more evident what the driver is to expect. And ditto again for presenting a set of alternatives. So restrooms, gasoline, lodging, and telephone. If you just have representative icons that actually look like what they're representing, it's easier than having to read those four words on a sign at highway speeds. But it should be emphasized that, things can in fact still go wrong. Yeah. Okay. This is in fact this is just for humor. And by the way, I had to look this up, because when I saw the one on the left, it's like, what the heck is that icon actually trying to demonstrate? As it turns out that that's an icon that was used to essentially say that this is an environmental study area. So essentially it's somebody doing essentially an environmental study, and it's doing essentially like, measuring, surveying, essentially, doing activities that mean that you want other people to stay away so they don't interfere with results. But again, you look at that and it's like, what the heck is going on with that? And then see someone drowning, you really don't want to LOL. You want to call 911. And the other ones are just like, how did that happen? Yeah. Some other guidelines for creating effective icons, such as software. Rule of thumb for icon metaphors is that if you have to think about an icon to get it, the metaphor is in fact too complex. Design functionality, has suggestive icons. The image should in fact suggest the function. So for example, like some sort of writing program, having an icon that has a letter and a pen on it actually makes a lot of sense. You also want to avoid things like name suggestive icons, because that introduces an extra layer of abstraction. So what you see on the right hand side is an icon for a program known as Nautilus. Now that's good in terms of it does directly suggest the name of what it is, but it doesn't actually tell you what the program actually does. So good and bad sides in that particular case. And then don't rely on information users may not have. An icon may have internal meaning only. So the icon of the laser-eyed chipmunk is, if memory serves me right, is actually for a program called Soddy Potty. Don't ask. I don't know. But again, it doesn't make any sense at all. What you would want to do is have something that better illustrates what that actual icon can actually do. And you also want to avoid extraneous information, so don't have it too busy as to what you see on the right hand side. And you shouldn't try please like this is the like don't make dad jokes rule. Like, don't base icons off of word puns, such as a system log. That system log icon shouldn't be woody, and is also very much a language specific thing, so it really tends not to translate well. Coming back to some sort of cognitive psychological aspects of things, there's something you ought to know called the Fitts law of click times. So a nice quote from Bruce Tognazzi, who is one of the key designers of the Apple Macintosh interface. It's basically as he describes it, the time to acquire a target is a function of the distance to and size of the target. So in other words, you want to use large objects for important functions. So in other words, for the reason that big buttons tend to be easier to click. Note that this follows a log functionality, so the utility of making an already large button, say 20% larger than a smaller one, is not necessarily equal. So, but it is good for highlighting things on a page. If you make them bigger and you make the area to click on bigger, it's easier for people to then be able to click on them. So, and the Fitts law also predicts that corners and sides of your display are then faster to click on because you can't go past them. However, in reality, this isn't the case. But you can place buttons close to where you expect the cursor to appear on a page. Now, and again, know what I'm saying here. To appear on, the cursor to appear. If you are in fact using a mobile interface, that just doesn't apply. You clearly want to be able to group things in where you're able to visually see them and be able to click on the area that's associated with them. So in this case, note the relatively large button at the top, which is close to where you'd expect the cursor to be after entering a URL or clicking a bookmark. And again, this is looking at from a desktop perspective, but again, it works from a mobile perspective because, it is big and it's right in the center. It's going to be easier to hit the bigger button, especially with fat fingers, than not. So, also, it's worth keeping in point that the further the cursor has to travel to click an object, the more likely it is prone to error. So if you want to provide the user with a, most likely or primary options, close to the prime pixel point, an effect that's most often used in context-sensitive drop-down for the UI. In terms of web development, it's either to be where you expect the cursor to be, such as place button clicking actions on multiple pages close to each other, or roughly to the center of the screen. In terms of a standard drop-down menu from, say, a web page, this is where you can actually potentially have divisions within, say, a lengthy drop-down, where you can actually have sections. And then you sort of provide a bit of extra spacing so that it's easier to click within a section than across sections, so to speak. So by connecting navigation items together, they then become larger and easier to use. So the example on the right provides a seamless transition between home and blog, whereas the one on the left has an intermediate dead zone. So again, that's you just want to try to maximize the size of the clickable area. Now we're going to look at something a bit different, looking at the idea of how expression can come into play in terms of design. So, and again, this is from the book I was referencing earlier. If you see, both images that you see here depict faces, but they're very different. One is very busy, and the other one is, relatively clean. The other one seems to be expressing strong emotions, whereas the other one seems to be expressing calmness. The first one seems to be edgy and gritty, and the second seems to be, thoughtful. I can't remember who the artist is for the first one, but it's a Peanuts character by Charles M. Schulz on the right hand side, and yes, it's definitely clean, relatively calm, so to speak, and you can sort of see that the character is appears to be thoughtful. Now, how does this actually apply? Well, consider something like this, and I like to show this particular example. This is TD Bank website, and what is this web page trying to convey? And it's not just about the one picture that is in this image. And again, what do you see? Well, you have a clearly an older guy because he's got gray hair and he seems to be explaining something to a couple of other people. And then we have welcome to TD Asset Management and some blah 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 information there. But notice also the use of colors. It's in this case it's all using shades of green, but it's not like they're really sharp or vivid colors of green, except perhaps the logo, and you can even argue that it could in fact be more day glow if you really wanted it to be. So it's trying to convey essentially a sense that we can be trusted. There's nothing shocking here. You're going to have hopefully a comfortable experience. And if you don't believe me, then contrast that to something like this, for example, where you see just the opposite. You see fractured text. You see different sorts of font things going on. It's a little bit surprising to the eye. Like, why is that Z magazine so big? Okay, and then you have this scary looking face on the left, of course. And clearly this is not trying to convey the nice safe feel that you would get by going to a banking site. And it's like you look at any banking site, whatever your bank is, it's there to reassure you that you're putting your money into a good place. Whereas you go to a horror magazine website like, say, this, and this is going to be more par for the course. And why does this actually matter? Well, comes down to things like, confidence and trust. So, yeah, I mean, I love the one of the duck with buy stocks with us. And now, these are, with the exception of the lower left website, which you may remember from an earlier lecture, which, still exists. Most of these are, have long gone, but again, you look at these and, and again, the case would be with, buystocks.com. And it's like, you look at that particular design and you see the bright red and, frankly, an evil looking duck and the relatively primitive layout of things on the website. Now, this is in a time when, not all websites had to look like this. This was a deliberate choice. The same goes for Videosonic Labs and, Welcome to Foreign Language Laboratory. And, oh boy, yeah, I mean, how much would you in fact expect to be able to get, good and proper service from these particular sites? I would say, generally speaking, if you saw another site using a, dare I say, more conservative look and feel, you would feel better about, using that service than perhaps the equivalent on sites that look like this. Now, here is a less extreme example. This is a site from the financial domain. In fact, this is a later version of the site that we looked at earlier. Remember the one that had all of the images in the drop-down menu? So this is, looking at it a little bit later, and are you doing it regularly? This is, a site about money. And what are you are you doing? What are you doing? What should you be doing regular? Okay, now it is kind of humorous, but again, you see something like that, and you also see that, and this is more subtle. You see, for example, the icon for the group, which is a nice little green owl. Okay, green owl. And then IEF, but it's on the right hand side of the page. Why is the icon on the right? And why do we have like a cartoon image of a guy on the left hand, sort of left column? And why do we have, bright blue text and green? It's very cluttered. And while it may not be anywhere near as bad as, say, these particular sites, it's kind of, along the same lines. It's essentially a lesser version of the same types of things we see as an extreme in the previous example. So again, there are reasons for, wanting to, if your intent is to convey confidence and knowledge in a subject, you want to be able to do that in a way that is non-cluttered and will have the people coming to your website trust that you actually know what you're doing. And I would say, looking at this website when this was put up back in, now this is going back a ways from 2011, and take a look at what the current version of this website is now, and you can see that they have more or less learned their lesson, and they have made quite a number of changes that essentially make it more like this is an organization that you can trust. And now for the final section for today, just a few more slides to go. I want to have a little look at Nielsen Norman's thoughts on emotional design and the classic text on this topic. And while the focus is very much more on industrial design, the concepts that he puts across are universal, or so it seems, definitely within Western cultures, but I do believe that for the most part, these are accurate, essentially worldwide. And if you want to have an example, look at this book. The first chapter, it's still available on his own website there. So it's emotional design: why we love or hate everyday things. And basically he says that there's basically three different levels: basically visceral, behavioral, and reflective. And at the top is the reflective state, which is cognitive and, essentially the intellectual level, which watches over the other two levels and influences it. There's no direct connection to visceral reactions. Whereas at the bottom, we have visceral reactions, and they're fast, affective reactions about good and bad. It alerts behavioral and emotional reactions. And then in the middle is, essentially, it sits in at the level of conscious awareness, this is the level of most human behavior and controlled by reflection, but heavily influenced by visceral reactions we may be barely aware of. So at the visceral level, these are, it's considered to be hardwired within the human psyche. They're low level, they're triggered immediately based upon evolutionary advantages and survival strategies. Most graphic design elements try to work at this particular level. So typically speaking, and this is, in some ways sort of oversimplifying things, but you can get a sense that this is true. Things that are smooth and round are considered to be pleasant. Spiders or things that are multi-legged are considered, generally speaking, to be kind of creepy. I think spiders are cool, but I have to say that if I see something that has lots of legs and say it's creeping along or moving skittishly, yeah, it's going to. I'm going to react before I go, oh, it's just a harmless spider. So that's what we're talking about here, visceral reaction. Things that are sharp and pointed may elicit fear or danger signals, and like what do we see when we see baby faces, or the idea that in generally speaking in say young mammals, like oversized head to a relatively smaller proportion body, we tend to feel protective, or we go the reaction is sort of like, aw. So, if you go to things like, as you see here, the baby shop, yeah, it's lots of muted colors. Hey, let's throw in the face of a baby, and it's swaddled in something that's nice and soft. And okay, you may think that might be, like really pushing it, but if you go to, like say a Toys R Us site or something that is aimed at children, you will typically see, more muted colors and schemes like that, and children's faces used quite a lot in say the advertisements. And as you can see for the thing for spiders, again, perhaps the example of the Rue Morgue website, again, jagged features, the fonts are broken. It sort of implies that there's something not quite right. So these are things that then work at the visceral level. Then we have things that then work at the behavior level. These are based on field and use of an object. Is an icon feature good or bad to use? And this is where usability is really aimed at. An example of this would be a lengthy response time can cause confusion and frustration. So much like you see in this image of a poor woman at her notebook, if she is having trouble dealing with things on a website, that will then reflect badly on her perceptions of that particular interaction, and perhaps then onto the company. But then that is then the next level. That's reflective. So this is then based upon how we think about an object. Does it evoke trust or perhaps prestige? And this is where branding then works. So this is again, if you're using things like the logo of a company within the website, you want to be able to make sure that you use that effectively wherever that then appears within your website. You want to make sure that the message is that's why that if you ever have a chance to say look at a style guide for branding, they have strict guidelines as to how the logo should and should not be used. And again, this is working at then a reflective level. So if you see the Starbucks logo and think good coffee, or Google is like, yes, I can find things there that I can trust to find things. That is based upon reflection of things of your experiences over time. So that's essentially what's going on at the reflective level. And that is, well, I'm going to go to the blank page. That's basically it for today. What I'm going to be doing, also hoping to post this weekend, is some background information on how to use one of the two rapid prototyping tools. So you can then choose which version you'd like to use for the next studio session. And having said that, I will then see everybody, I hope, on for next Tuesday's class, covering off the remainder topics for this particular class and for the course. So I will see you Tuesday evening. Take care, folks. Bye.